who are those budget players in FPL this season that are going to make you rise up the ranks and win your mini leagues. Last season, it was players like Anthony Gordon, Cole Palmer, Eze, and Elise that were massively underpriced and were fantastic options in FPL. Today, we're going to go through defenders, midfielders, and forwards. We're going to look at those ones for your bench, those ones that you should be starting in your team as well in today's underpriced budget gems. What is up, everyone? Harry here. Before we dive in, 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here as well. And today we are going through all of those cheaper players, 6 million maximum in budget for midfielders and forwards, and then 4.5 maximum for defenders. We'll look at some rotating options as well that you should be considering in your teams for game week 1. Before we do that, before we dive in, this video and all the data is taken from Fantasy Football Scout, who do power and sponsor the channel as we go through the season. If you do want to use all this data, look at some of the predictive points, look at some of those data from last season, go and check the link in the description. You can get 40% off at the moment. But we're going to start up front, and there is lots of talk about some of these cheap forwards. When the game first launched, there was a lot of love for João Pedro of Brighton. 5.5 million he came in. However, there are a few other options that I do think we should be considering. A couple that come in at 6 million is Chris Wood, who's starting to get a little bit of traction with some preseason form. MIDs of Fulham also looking very good and was fantastic at points last season. You've got Visa of Brentford, who particularly is one to keep an eye on. If Ivan Toney does leave, that could give Visa a very, very big role in the team, as he did last season when Toney was suspended. And the final one is another cheaper 5.5 million option in Adam Armstrong of Southampton. There's no real 5 million option, so either you go for a 4.5 million option, which we'll talk about in a moment, or you stretch your budget up to one of these. Now, if we have a look at some of the data from last season, starting off with those points per 90 when they do get on the pitch, Chris Wood's returns were fantastic for 6 million. There is a little bit of threat for him from Taiwo Awoniyi, but I just don't think it's in terms of starts. I think Awoniyi will be an impact sub. Chris Wood is the one that Nuno trusted at the end of last season when they needed to stay in the Premier League, and he's the one he's playing during pre-season now. Awoniyi has had horrible injury records while he's been at Nottingham Forest as well, and I think he will see Chris Wood as his starter and then Awoniyi to come off the bench. That doesn't mean Chris Wood is going to play 90 every week though. That is the only slight caveat. Next up, in terms of highest points per 90 last season, was MIDs of Fulham. Once he broke into that team around Christmas time, he was such a good option. Manchester United in the opening fixture does put people off a little bit, but after that, the fixtures for them are just as good, if not better than all of the others. Visa's returns weren't that great. He started off well, but once Toney came back, the goals did dry up for him. And then Adam Armstrong is the cheaper option at Southampton. Newcastle on the opening day isn't great, but in terms of his returns in the Championship were really good. He is on penalties for them as well. The only thing is you are trying to predict a Championship team and how they're going to perform in the Prem. I would rather look at one of the Premier League proven forwards. Now, I don't think João Pedro is that good an option. He hasn't travelled on pre-season with Brighton at the moment. His underlying data is really good, but the opening fixtures are not great. They play Manchester United, Everton away, Arsenal away in the first 3 fixtures. His underlying data is the best out of all these 5 we've got here though, followed by Chris Wood, and then you've got Armstrong's Championship data, MIDs of Fulham, and then Visa in at the bottom. For me, Chris Wood and MIDs are head and shoulders above the others. Depends how much you want that game week 1 fixture, because MIDs doesn't really have it. You have someone else like an Nkunku in your team who also doesn't have a good game week 1 fixture, then maybe you don't want it. But if you could bench MIDs for someone like a Rodgers in your midfield who's only 5 million, then I like him. So Chris Wood and MIDs, I think, are worth getting the extra 0.5 over João Pedro. If I had to pick one at the moment, it would probably be Chris Wood of Nottingham Forest at 6 million. Next up is having a look at some of those midfielders with a maximum budget of 5.5 million. Again, there's slightly less options in here than I think we get in the forward. Again, if you go up to 6 million, there aren't really any more that you'd add in there. So it is really 5.5 million, or you want to go up to a 6.5 million in someone like an Nkunku or a Bailey at Aston Villa. Hudson-Odoi at Nottingham Forest, as we spoke about with Chris Wood, he's also on really good preseason form. The data in terms of underlying expected goals in goal involvement, goals or assists, isn't actually that good, but his returns are really, really strong. That is because he often takes that shot from the sort of the edge of the box, which he cuts in onto his right foot and he finishes it in the far post, something he's fantastic at. But in terms of actual data, that's quite a difficult shot to finish, which is why his expected goal involvement is quite low. Rodgers at Aston Villa is getting a whole load of looking at the moment. I do think he's a really nice option as long as we get towards game week 1 and he looks as nailed as he does now. 3 goals, 1 assist for him so far in pre-season. Andreas Pereira, 5.5 million, may well be on penalties for Fulham going into the new season as well. His returns last season were pretty good. He has the best underlying data of any of the midfielders that we've got on the list, apart from Alcaraz, but his data is for championship level. So the other thing to mention about Alcaraz is he might end up playing in a sort of a false 9 up front, whilst there are injuries to some of their forwards and with Che Adams leaving the club as well. Semenyo is an interesting one. His data was from a forward last year, so his points per 90 are quite good, but he is moving to a midfielder, so it might get even better with the extra point for a goal. Underlying data is not quite as strong though, and in terms of opening fixtures, they are weaker than the others. The other one to mention in here is Smith Rowe, who looks like he's going to be signing for Fulham. That might have a little bit of a knock-on impact on someone like Andreas Pereira, who might be forced to play a little bit deeper with João Palhinha leaving. For me, Rodgers at 5 million is just the best that we've got here. Hudson-Odoi is also really nice. If you wanted to go and get Gibbs White at 6.5 million, you could do that. Both Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest have a really nice run of opening fixtures. So if you can get to a 5.5 million, maybe it's Hudson-Odoi. But Rodgers at 5, if he looks as nailed to the start of the season as he does now, it just feels like a no-brainer. Now, staying on midfielders and forwards and looking at those 4.5 options, there basically aren't very many at the moment. At the moment, looking at the forwards, Cannon of Leicester is a young forward who got some good minutes off the bench, 13 appearances off the bench, 2 goals and an assist, okay minutes. Is probably the one at the moment who looks like he might get some decent game time. However, the one to keep an eye on really is Stewart at Southampton. In the Championship, before he signed for Southampton, he was at Sunderland and absolutely banging in goals. Then he signed for Southampton and was injured almost all of last season, so hardly got any minutes. Now, going into this season, he is expected to be back in pre-season just before the start of the season. It might mean that he's not ready to be on the bench in game weeks 1, maybe 2. But after that, once they get ready for the season, he should be the one that gets most minutes. And he has pretty good goal threat as well. So if you need a 4.5 million forward, keep an eye on Stewart, because he's probably the one that I'd recommend at the moment if he can get back fit, ready close to the start of the season or just after a fair few game weeks. Into midfield, there's a few options you've got here. Winks or even Sangare at Nottingham Forest, both 4.5. They are midfielders who are likely to play a lot of minutes, but are not going to get you many attacking returns. They're likely to get you 2 or 3 points every single game. You've got Winks predicted to get 2.5 points per game. He got only 2 goals in 45 appearances in the Championship, but he's going to play almost every game for Leicester. Then the slightly more exciting pick at the moment is Bergvall at Spurs. He's a new youngster, a new sort of central midfielder, a fantastic looking signing for them. They've got an absolute bargain for. At the moment, with some of the injuries, he has been playing in pre-season and he might get a run in from the start if those injuries don't recover like Pape Sarr. The only thing is, once those players do come back, he is unlikely to be put on the bench. That doesn't mean he won't get no minutes. He should get substitute appearances because he does look really good. He might even be a Maddison replacement or something like that in the team once Maddison gets a little bit tired later on to games. So Winks is your more sort of nailed play 90 minutes, but Bergvall at the moment, if we look like those injuries are not going to recover, is likely to get more returns throughout the season, but it will be substitute appearances most of the time. Looking at the cheapest defenders, so those 4.0 million defenders, first of all is Harwood Bellis of Southampton. Decent enough option, is very nailed, got a few returns, 5 returns in the Championship. The opening fixtures are not bad. You could then have a look at Leicester. Wout Faes is also 4 million. Played a lot of games for them. Of course, started for Belgium in the Euros as well. Then you can look at Ipswich as well. All of them have 4.0 million starting defenders. It kind of depends which one rotates into your team a little better. For me, I'm going with Harwood Bellis at the moment because I might need him in game week 2 when he has Nottingham Forest at home, whilst Faes and Johnson both have more difficult fixtures away from home in game week 2. Johnson has signed from West Ham though and has gone to Ipswich, should be getting good minutes and might be more attacking than the others because he's likely to play at right back. The other one to keep an eye on at the moment though is Barco of Brighton. Estupiñán is likely to be out injured until at least mid-September, but the rumours are he might even be out until October. Given that Estupiñán's injury record has not been great, they're probably going to be a little bit cautious with him. It is expected at the moment that Barco at 4 million is likely to fill in for him until Estupiñán is back. In the most recent pre-season friendly, he played 45 minutes and took set pieces as well. If we think Estupiñán is going to be out until game week 6, game week 7 onwards, Barco is definitely better than the others, despite not having the best opening fixtures. Now, comparing some of these cheap defenders, and there are a lot of 4.5 million defenders that people are looking at. We've got Aina of Nottingham Forest. We've got Konza of Aston Villa. We've got Robertson, Mikalenko, Byrne, Martinez of Manchester United, and Anderson of Crystal Palace. There are a few others that people might look at, but at the moment, these are my top ones. I prefer Anderson over Gahey, for example. And this is the top, I think, 7 that we've got for me. Now, the whole thing for 4.5 million defenders is pick maybe your favourite and then have a look at which one they rotate well with. Now, in terms of ones that are popular at the moment, Konza looks really popular, Mikalenko for me as well, and Anderson along with Dan Burn. I'd be a little bit cautious of Dan Burn just because they have other left backs like Lewis Hall. They have signed a new centre back. He isn't 100% nailed at the moment. Now, there is rumours that Trippier might leave, and if that happens, then Livramento at 4.5 million as their potential right back, if they don't sign someone, will be an absolute shoe into most of our squads. Nottingham Forest was so good defensively in the second half of the season. They only conceded really from a lot of set pieces, and we know they've signed a tall goalkeeper and a tall centre-back to try and combat that. Konza is popular. Again, they finished 4th in the Premier League. My only concern with them is the Champions League starting and what impact that fatigue might have on them from game week 5 onwards. Robinson was really good in terms of expected sort of attacking data. Expected sort of clean sheets were not that great. They conceded more goals per 90 minutes than the others that we've got on the list, but he did offer attacking threat. Martinez at Manchester United, I don't think you should be picking. If they get a little bit better with some of the signings they've made, then potentially, but statistically, they were the weakest defense and he is the least attacking threat out of them. In terms of me ranking these defenders, for me, Mikalenko is head and shoulders above the rest here. Looking at the others, if Branthwaite or Tarkowski were 4.5, everyone would be picking them. So I think Mikalenko is a fantastic pick. I like Konza, I like Robertson, and I like Anderson probably next. Then maybe Dan Burn and Aina, and then Martinez is at the bottom. But as I said, it's really about rotation once you've picked the favourite one you own. So having a look at some of those player rotations for you. First of all, as I said, I think Mikalenko is the best 4.5 million defender. So looking at who he rotates best with. First up is Anderson of Crystal Palace, who I also really like. The good thing about this rotation is you don't have to bench good fixtures. You get some of the other rotations that you have some weeks that you have 2 good fixtures. That only really happens in game week 6 out of game week 10. Apart from that, you can play Mikalenko most of the time. And that's something I realized that apart from game week 2 and 4, you're pretty much happy just to play Mikalenko every week. But Anderson does fit in well, as does Robinson. Now, Robinson has more weeks where he has a good fixture at the same time as Mikalenko. This is both a good and a bad thing. It means that you have strong depth on your bench. When you bench one of them, you have a good first sub if someone in your starting 11 doesn't play, but it also means you're more likely to leave a few points on the bench. So Anderson is maybe a sort of more simple one, whereas Robinson will give you a better first sub a lot of weeks. Then if you don't like going for Mikalenko and you want to go with someone else, we do have Konza rotating very well with Anderson as well. Things fall pretty straightforward. Konza has a really nice run of fixtures. He has some goal threat. They are mainly reliant on clean sheets for them. And with the Champions League, what will that do with him? Or you can just pick 2 players who both have really good fixtures. That can be Konza, Aina, and then you can also look at Mikalenko, any 2 of those 3, and basically just play the best one. And it means you'll have a pretty good sub every single week. So if we're looking at Konza and Aina here again, for probably 5 of the first 10 weeks, you'd have a pretty reliable first sub anyway. So there are 4 examples in here. Personally, I think Mikalenko is the strongest defender. So I would be going with him and then either Robinson or Anderson. But if you don't like Mikalenko for whatever reason, there are a couple more rotations for you here. However, just one more rotation to talk to you about, and there'll be a little spoiler for my draft video, which will be out at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. So set your notifications and a reminder for when that video does go live. Is actually if you have 2 strong defenders. So a lot of people are looking like Gabriel, Gvardiol, and then sort of other defenders in there. If you're going down that route, instead of going for a 4.5, 4.5, 4.0, we do have the ability to rotate Mikalenko with 2 4.0 defenders. Because as I said earlier on, Mikalenko just has such good fixtures. You can play him pretty much every week apart from game week 2 and game week 4. In game week 2, Barco, if he is starting over Estupiñán, you can play him at home to United. You'd probably play Harwood Bellis at home to Nottingham Forest. The only other week that's bad is in game week 4 where Mikalenko has a tough fixture. But you can play Barco of Brighton at home to Ipswich in that fixture. And then from game week 5 onwards, you can just play Mikalenko every week. So you don't actually need Mikalenko and another 4.5 defender if you've got room for two 4.0s on the bench. This is something I found the other day, and I actually think it is a really, really solid, really, really nice option that will save you 0.5 million, which I actually needed for my team. I built a draft which had sort of 0.5 that I needed, and I couldn't find it until I found this rotation. And I'm just banking on Mykolenko being a good option when I go with something like that. So this is actually something I've not seen mentioned anywhere, and I think it could be really useful if a Stupinan is indeed out until about October time. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as preseason goes on, but there are a few other rotations if he does come back, and if Trippier does leave, Livramento could easily slot into a lot of these rotations, particularly Mykolenko. Livramento can also be very, very popular. So we've gone through forwards, midfielders, defenders, 4.5 million options, 5 million, 5.5, 6 million, depending on what position you're looking at. These are the cheap options that we're filling in the final few spots in your team that, of course, might allow you to afford someone like a Haaland, someone like a Salah, a Foden, a Saka, a Palmer, a combination of these, or maybe you're going Haaland and Salah and you need both of them. These players could potentially be what you need to go and afford them. So tomorrow there'll be a draft video as well. As I said, all the data that I used, the expected goals conceded, the expected points, the XGI per 90, all taken from Fantasy Football Scout members area. So check out the link in the description if it's of use to you at all. If not, you can keep coming back to these videos and see me using it pretty much all season as well. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all the support on the videos. I hope you're enjoying preseason with FPL being back by just over a week. There will be a video next week where I rate some of your drafts as well. So keep an eye out on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube comments for when I do ask for some of your drafts. 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here, and I'll be back again very soon.